Ambush at Alrosa. Darrell Abbott was known to the world as Dimebag. He had built his name as the guitarist for Pantera, one of the defining heavy metal bands of the 1990s. A band whose sound had shaped an entire generation of metal musicians. After Pantera broke up, he formed Damageplan with his brother Vinnie Paul, determined to build a new chapter for the Abbott brothers in the metal world. By December 8, 2004, Damageplan was working the club circuit, the kind of grinding tour schedule bands use to establish a new project. That night they were booked at the Alrosa Villa in Columbus, Ohio, a mid-sized nightclub typical of the rooms metal bands played on tour. The space was intimate enough that fans stood close to the stage rail, and the crowd that night had come specifically to see Dimebag, a guitarist whose riffs had defined an era. The band's head of security was present, along with venue staff and a packed audience pressed near the front of the stage. The show opened the way club shows normally did. The lights came up, the amplifiers were loud, and Damageplan launched into the first song of their set, working through the kind of opening number meant to set the tone for the rest of the night. Then a man rushed the stage from the crowd. He was a former United States Marine, and he was carrying a firearm. He moved directly toward Dimebag and opened fire on him at point-blank range, shooting him multiple times while he stood on stage holding his guitar. The shooting did not stop with Dimebag. The gunman kept firing into the chaos that followed, killing 3 more people in the span of those moments. Among the dead were a venue employee, a fan who had been standing near the stage, and the band's head of security, who had moved toward the threat trying to stop it. In the confusion, the gunman took a hostage inside the club. Patrons scrambled for the exits. Band members and crew tried to make sense of what was happening as the room that had been full of music seconds earlier became a scene of panic and screaming. Columbus police arrived within minutes of the first calls. Officers moved into the building knowing an active shooter was inside and that he had already taken a hostage. A responding officer engaged the gunman directly inside the venue and shot him dead, ending the threat. In the aftermath, first responders worked through the club assessing the wounded and confirming the dead. Dimebag had been shot at close range during the opening song of the set, and the wounds were unsurvivable. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The shooter, the former Marine who had carried out the attack, was killed by the responding police officer inside the Alrosa Villa that night. Electrocuted while tuning. Leslie Harvey was 27 years old and the guitarist for the Scottish rock band Stone the Crows. By 1972, the band had built a steady following on the strength of his playing and the club circuit that carried them through venues across Britain. He was considered one of the more promising guitar talents to come out of the Scottish rock scene of that period, a player whose reputation was still rising. On May 3, 1972, Stone the Crows were booked to play the top-ranked suite in Swansea, Wales. The venue was packed for the show, a typical club date for a touring rock band of the era. The stage had been set up under stage lighting, and a crowd had gathered close to watch the band prepare in the time before the set began. Before the performance started, Harvey was tuning up on stage, going through the routine any guitarist follows before a show. He had his electric guitar in hand, his fingers gripping the metal strings as he worked through the standard checks of pitch and sound ahead of the performance. As part of that routine, Harvey reached out toward a microphone positioned near him on the stage. The microphone had not been properly grounded, with one hand still gripping the metal strings of his guitar and the other making contact with the live microphone. Electrical current passed directly through his body in full view of the gathering crowd. He was electrocuted instantly. Witnesses in the room watched it happen in real time, the moment unfolding in front of an audience that had come to see the band perform. Crew members on site tried to respond immediately, working to cut the power and break the connection running through him. They were unable to safely disconnect the circuit in time to change the outcome. The contact between Harvey, the live microphone, and the guitar strings had created a continuous path for the current, and there was no quick way to interrupt it from outside the circuit without risk to anyone who touched him. Harvey was removed from the stage and prepared for transport to receive medical attention. He did not survive the trip. He was pronounced dead before reaching the hospital, the cause confirmed as electrocution from the ungrounded equipment on stage. The case became one of the defining examples cited afterward in discussions of road crew electrical safety, a reminder of how a single piece of improperly grounded equipment could prove fatal on a stage that, moments earlier, had looked completely ordinary. Cobra Bite Stage. Irma Bule was 29 years old and one of the more recognizable performers on the Indonesian dangdut circuit. Her shows were known for a specific and unusual feature, live venomous snakes, which she incorporated directly into her performances as part of the spectacle that drew crowds to her concerts across the region. The act had become her signature, and audiences came specifically expecting to see it. In 2016, Bule was booked for a performance in Karawang, West Java. The format of the show followed her established act, regional dangdut music paired with the snake handling segment that crowds had come to expect. A snake handler worked alongside her as part of the routine, responsible for managing the animals used during the performance. During the show, Bule was holding a king cobra as part of the routine. At some point in the segment, she stepped on the tail of the snake she was holding. The cobra reacted to the contact by striking, biting her directly on the thigh in front of the audience watching the performance unfold. In the moments after the bite, Bule believed the snake had already been milked of its venom by the handler beforehand, or she chose to continue regardless. She declined an antidote that was available to her and kept performing, continuing to sing through the rest of the segment and into the following minutes of the show. She continued for approximately 45 minutes after the bite occurred. Over that stretch of time, the venom worked through her system while she remained on stage in front of the crowd, finishing out the performance she had started. Her condition began to deteriorate visibly as the set continued. She started vomiting in front of the audience. Seizures followed, her body reacting to the venom that had been building in her system since the bite. She collapsed on stage, falling into a coma in full view of the crowd that had been watching her perform only minutes before. Responders and medical personnel on site worked to treat her once her condition became clear, but the venom had already had 45 minutes to spread through her body untreated. She did not recover from the coma. Bule was pronounced dead, the cause confirmed as the venomous bite from the king cobra she had been performing with that night. Station Nightclub fire. Ty Longley was the guitarist for the rock band Great White, a band that had built its reputation through the 1980s and continued touring clubs across the country into the 2000s. On February 20, 2003, the band was booked for an intimate club show at the Station, a nightclub in West Warwick, Rhode Island. The Station was a small venue, the kind of room where club tour bands like Great White played regularly, with a packed crowd standing close to the stage for the performance. As part of the band's opening, pyrotechnics were set off on stage, a standard part of their live show that had been used at other tour stops without incident before that night. That night, the pyrotechnics ignited flammable acoustic foam that had been installed on the walls of the club. The foam caught fire almost immediately, and flames began spreading rapidly across the surface of the walls surrounding the stage and the crowd. The fire grew quickly, and the room began filling with thick black smoke within moments of the foam igniting. The crowd, packed close to the stage and near the venue's limited exits, began trying to evacuate as the smoke and flames spread through the building. The exits became choked with people trying to escape all at once. Longley initially made it out of the building, escaping through a back door as the fire and smoke filled the club behind him. What happened after that point is disputed. Some accounts say he went back inside to check on fans still trapped in the building, while other accounts say he returned to retrieve his guitar. Neither account has been confirmed as definitive. What is confirmed is that Longley did not make it back out. He died inside the station along with 99 other people, making the fire one of the deadliest nightclub disasters in American history. Firefighters and emergency crews arrived to find a building engulfed in fire, with victims trapped inside by the smoke, flames, and the bottleneck at the limited number of exits. The scale of the casualties became clear only as crews worked through the wreckage in the hours that followed. Longley was confirmed among the 100 people who died in the fire that night, his death attributed to the blaze that consumed the station. The disaster led directly to changes in fire safety regulations for nightclubs and live music venues across the country, including stricter rules on flammable materials and indoor pyrotechnic use. Collapse on cue. Bruce Hampton, known to fans and fellow musicians as Colonel Bruce Hampton, was a fixture of the avant-garde blues rock scene, a band leader and performer whose career stretched back decades, and whose theatrical, often surreal stage presence had become as much a part of his identity as his music. In 2017, Hampton turned 70, and a celebration was organized to mark the occasion. The show was held at the Fox Theater in Atlanta, Georgia, a large and storied venue, and the bill was stacked with guest musicians who had come out specifically to perform alongside Hampton for his birthday. The night was built around collaboration, with musicians rotating on and off stage throughout an extended set, and the crowd was full of longtime fans there to celebrate a career spanning generations. As the night built toward its climax, the musicians on stage moved into a massive group jam of the song Turn On Your Love Light, with Hampton among them performing in front of the packed theater. The energy in the room was high, the kind of celebratory peak the night had been building toward for hours. During the jam, Hampton collapsed, going down onto his knees in front of the band and the crowd. Given his reputation for eccentric and theatrical behavior on stage, both the musicians playing beside him and the fans watching from the crowd assumed it was a deliberate, dramatic gesture, a mock bow consistent with the kind of showmanship Hampton was known for throughout his career. The band kept playing. For several minutes, musicians performed directly next to Hampton's slumped body, with no one on stage or in the crowd recognizing that anything was wrong. The assumption that this was part of the show persisted as the song continued around him. It was only after several minutes that the people on stage realized Hampton was not performing a bit. He had suffered a massive heart attack. Once the situation was understood, those around him moved to respond, and medical attention was sought for him there, in front of the crowd that had been celebrating his birthday moments earlier. Hampton was pronounced dead, the cause confirmed as a massive heart attack suffered during the performance. The collapse, mistaken for theater for several full minutes by everyone present, marked the end of a celebration that had been built specifically to honor his 7 decades. Collapse behind drums. Nick Menza had built his reputation as the drummer for Megadeth during the band's defining run through the 1990s, a period that established him as one of the era's most recognized metal drummers. After leaving Megadeth, Menza continued performing, eventually forming the instrumental band OHM, which blended jazz and metal influences into a sound distinct from his earlier work. On May 21, 2016, Menza was performing with OHM at the Baked Potato, a jazz club in Studio City, California. The Baked Potato was a small, well-known club on the Los Angeles music scene, the kind of intimate room where musicians played to dedicated fans in close quarters, far smaller than the arenas Menza had once filled with Megadeth. The show began normally, with Menza, 51 years old at the time, behind his drum kit as OHM worked through their set in front of the crowd gathered at the club. The band played with the same high energy that had characterized Menza's playing throughout his career, moving through their opening numbers in front of an audience that had come specifically to see him perform. 3 songs into the set, Menza suffered a sudden and catastrophic heart attack. He collapsed forward over his drum kit in the middle of the performance, the kit absorbing his weight as he went down in front of his bandmates and the crowd watching from the floor of the club. Paramedics were called and rushed to the stage once the emergency became apparent. They worked to resuscitate Menza on site, performing aggressive efforts to revive him directly in front of the audience that remained in the club. Despite those efforts, he could not be revived. Menza was pronounced dead, the cause confirmed as cardiac arrest suffered during the performance. He died on the stage of the small club where he had chosen to keep performing years after his time with one of metal's most successful bands. Fall from ladder. Richard Versalle was an American operatic tenor with a long career on some of the most prestigious stages in the world, including the Metropolitan Opera in New York City, one of the most recognized opera houses on earth. By January 5, 1996, Versalle was an established performer with the company, taking on demanding roles in front of the Met's audiences. That night, the Metropolitan Opera was staging Leos Janáček's The Makropoulos Case, and Versalle was performing the role of Vitek. The production called for a particular piece of staging in this scene, with Versalle positioned partway up a ladder roughly 20 feet above the stage floor as part of the set design for the moment. The performance had proceeded normally up to that point, the orchestra playing, the audience seated and following the production as it moved through its scenes. Versalle, in character as Vitek, was midway up the ladder when he delivered his line for the moment. The line he sang was, "Too bad you can only live so long." Moments after singing it, Versalle suffered a massive heart attack while still positioned on the ladder above the stage. He fell backward off the ladder, dropping the roughly 20 feet to the stage floor below in full view of the audience and the rest of the cast performing around him. The fall happened suddenly, with no warning to those on stage or in the seats watching the production unfold. The performance was halted immediately. Cast members and crew responded to what had happened on stage, and the curtain was brought down in front of an audience that had just watched the moment occur. Medical attention was sought for Versalle inside the opera house following the fall. Versalle was pronounced dead, the cause confirmed as a massive heart attack. The specific line he had sung only moments before the attack, referencing how long a person can live, became one of the most noted details associated with his death in the years that followed. Collapse in Palestrina. Mark Sandman was the frontman, bassist, and a defining creative force behind Morphine, an alternative rock band known for its distinctive sound built around a 2-string slide bass and saxophone. By 1999, Morphine had built a dedicated following through years of touring and a catalog that had established the band as a respected name in the alternative rock scene. On July 3, 1999, Morphine was booked to play the Giardini del Principe Festival in Palestrina, Italy, an outdoor summer show that had drawn a sizable and anticipating crowd. The heat of an Italian summer day bore down on the outdoor festival grounds as the band prepared to take the stage for what was expected to be a standard performance for the touring group. Sandman, 46 years old at the time, took his position on stage as Morphine began their set in front of the gathered crowd. The performance moved forward as expected, the band working through their material under the heat and the physical demands that came with an outdoor summer show. In the middle of the performance, Sandman suddenly collapsed, going down flat on his back on the stage in front of the crowd. The collapse happened abruptly, with no clear warning to the people watching from the audience. The crowd's initial reaction was to cheer. Given Sandman's stage presence and the kind of theatrical moments that could occur during a Morphine performance, many in the audience assumed his collapse was a stylistic pose, a deliberate part of the show rather than a medical emergency unfolding in front of them. Sandman had in fact suffered a massive heart attack, brought on by the combination of severe heat, physical exhaustion from the performance, and underlying stress that had not been visible to those watching him perform. Bandmates and crew on site responded once it became clear the collapse was not part of the act, and emergency medical services were called to the festival grounds. Sandman was transported toward medical care following the collapse. He died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, the cause confirmed as a heart attack linked to the heat and exhaustion of the performance. His death brought an immediate end to Morphine's active career as a band. Collapse behind booth. Isaac Freeman III, known to audiences worldwide as Fat Man Scoop, had built a career as one of the most recognizable hype men and rappers in the music industry, known for his high-energy stage presence and his ability to drive a crowd into excitement through sheer vocal force. By August 30, 2024, Freeman had spent decades performing at this same level of intensity across countless shows. That night, Freeman was booked to perform at Town Center Park in Hampton, Connecticut, an outdoor public venue that had drawn a crowd out to see him perform live. The setting was typical for the kind of community and festival shows Freeman had continued to play throughout his career, a stage set up in an open park with a DJ booth positioned alongside it. The performance began with Freeman in his element, pacing back and forth across the stage and shouting into the microphone to keep the crowd's energy at a peak, consistent with the style that had defined his career for decades. He worked the stage aggressively, moving the way he always had, driving the crowd through call and response moments that had become his trademark. At a certain point in the performance, Freeman walked behind the DJ booth, moving out of the direct view of the audience watching from the park. Once behind the booth and out of sight of the crowd, he collapsed. The collapse happened away from the audience's direct line of sight, with crew and people positioned near the booth becoming aware of the emergency before the wider crowd did. Freeman suffered a fatal medical episode at that point, exact circumstances of which were not disclosed beyond what was publicly reported. Emergency responders and crew on site moved to attend to him once the emergency became known, working to treat him at the scene before he was removed from the venue. Despite those efforts, he did not survive. Freeman was pronounced dead, the cause stated as a medical episode suffered during the performance. His death drew attention to the physical toll that decades of high-intensity live performance can place on aging performers who continue working at that pace. Tiptoe into silence. Herbert Carey, universally known by his stage name Tiny Tim, was one of the most eccentric and distinctive figures in American pop music history. Armed with a ukulele, a shopping bag, and a soaring, unmistakable falsetto, he achieved massive fame in the late 1960s with his hit cover of Tiptoe Through the Tulips. Decades after his commercial peak, he remained a dedicated touring performer, determined to keep singing despite mounting health complications. On November 30th, 1996, Tiny Tim was booked to perform at a gala benefit hosted by the Women's Club of Minneapolis in Minnesota. He had suffered a severe heart attack just 2 months earlier at a ukulele festival, and his doctors, along with his wife, had strongly warned him that live performing was putting his life at immediate risk. He refused to stop, famously stating that he wanted to die doing what he loved. The gala room was full of guests when Tiny Tim took the stage, accompanied by his wife, who helped him to his position. He opened his set and began singing his signature number, Tiptoe Through the Tulips, for the audience. The performance carried the same manic energy and theatricality that had defined his career for decades. In the middle of the song, his voice faltered. He stopped playing, turned to his wife, and told her that he did not feel well. Before anyone in the room could react or step in to assist him, He collapsed flat on the stage floor in front of the gathered crowd. The audience, accustomed to his erratic and highly dramatic stage movements, initially sat in confusion, unsure if the sudden fall was part of his eccentric act. The realization that it was a medical emergency spread through the room only when his wife and venue staff rushed to his side and found him unresponsive. Medical personnel arrived at the venue and performed aggressive resuscitation efforts on site before rushing him to a nearby hospital. The damage to his heart was too severe. He was pronounced dead later that evening. The cause confirmed as a massive heart attack suffered directly during his most famous song. Quiet exit mid-song. David Olney was a highly revered figure within the American folk and Americana songwriting community. A musician's musician whose literate, poetic storytelling had earned the deep respect of peers like Emmylou Harris and Linda Ronstadt. Over a career spanning 5 decades, Olney had recorded more than 20 albums and maintained a steady touring schedule, performing intimate shows for dedicated folk music fans across the country. On January 18, 2020, Olney was participating in the 30A Songwriters Festival in Santa Rosa Beach, Florida. The event was an intimate, acoustic performance where multiple songwriters sat in a circle on stage, taking turns sharing stories and performing their material on acoustic guitars in front of a quiet, attentive audience. Olney, 71 years old at the time, was in the middle of performing his third song of the set, accompanied by a fellow musician on stage. The atmosphere in the room was entirely calm, with the crowd focused closely on the performance. Without warning, Olney stopped playing mid-tune. He did not drop his guitar, slam into his equipment, or show the kind of violent physical distress usually associated with a sudden collapse. Instead, he paused, calmly apologized to the other musicians and the audience, and simply closed his eyes. He lowered his chin to his chest, remaining seated upright on his stool with his guitar still in his lap. The movement was so serene and quiet that the crowd and his fellow performers assumed he was simply taking a long, emotional pause or focusing his thoughts before continuing the track. It took several moments for the musician sitting next to him to realize that Olney had lost consciousness. He had suffered a sudden, catastrophic heart attack. Once the emergency was understood, doctors in the audience rushed the stage to perform CPR, and emergency services were called to the festival venue. Olney could not be revived. He was pronounced dead, his passing marking a uniquely quiet and gentle exit that unfolded in real time, in front of an audience that, seconds earlier, had been listening to the final notes of his music. Rumba King's final verse. Jules Shungu Wembadio Pene Kikumba, known globally to millions of music fans as Papa Wemba, was a towering giant of African music. Celebrated as the king of Congolese rumba, he had spent decades pioneering and transforming world music by blending traditional African sounds with Western rock, carrying the rhythm of the Congo to international arena stages. Beyond his golden voice, he was a massive cultural icon, celebrated for championing a movement that turned high fashion and elegance into a profound statement of pride. On April 24, 2016, Papa Wemba was headlining the urban music festival known as Femmua in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. The massive outdoor festival grounds were packed with thousands of energetic fans, and the performance was being broadcast live on public television channels across West Africa. The concert was unfolding at a high peak of energy, with Papa Wemba, 66 years old, backed by a full ensemble of musicians and dancers moving through a fast-paced, highly synchronized rhythmic bridge. The crowd was dancing along to a performance that felt like a massive celebration. In the middle of a song, while his dancers were performing at the front of the stage, Papa Wemba suddenly slumped backward and collapsed onto the stage floor. Because the band was playing at maximum volume and the dancers were facing the crowd, several seconds passed before anyone on stage realized their band leader had gone down. The television cameras, broadcasting live to thousands of viewers at home, captured the exact moment his fellow performers stopped dancing, spun around in shock, and rushed to his side. The music stopped abruptly, throwing the massive festival crowd into immediate confusion as paramedics rushed the stage in front of the audience. Papa Wemba had suffered an immediate and fatal cardiac arrest. He died before the ambulance could reach the hospital, his sudden passing triggering a massive wave of public mourning across the African continent for a cultural pioneer who had finished his final verse directly on stage. Collapse on the ocean. John Thomas Hashian, universally known as Sib, cemented his legacy in rock history as the drummer for Boston, playing on their massive self-titled debut album that defined 1970s arena rock. Decades after his peak commercial success, Hashian remained an energetic and dedicated performer, continuing to play the instrument he loved well into his late 60s. In March 2017, Hashian was booked as a featured performer on the Legends of Rock cruise, a music-themed voyage sailing the Caribbean, offering fans an intimate opportunity to see classic rock veterans perform at sea. On March 22nd, the cruise was underway, and Hashian was on stage performing in front of a packed crowd of rock enthusiasts. He was playing a set alongside other notable musicians from his era, driving the rhythm from behind the drum kit with the same power that had characterized his early career. Mid-song, without any prior indication of distress, Hashian suddenly collapsed over his drums. The performance ground to an immediate halt as fellow musicians and crew rushed to his side. Shipboard medical personnel were summoned instantly, and CPR was administered on stage in front of the stunned audience. Despite the use of a defibrillator and aggressive resuscitation efforts by the medical team, Hashian could not be revived. He was pronounced dead on the ship, the cause later confirmed as a massive heart attack, passing away while keeping time for a crowd of dedicated fans out on the open ocean. Blues in Yokohama. Johnny Guitar Watson was a monumental figure in the development of rhythm and blues, funk, and soul music. Over a career spanning 40 years, his blazing guitar style and charismatic stage persona influenced artists ranging from Jimi Hendrix to Frank Zappa. By 1996, Watson was 61 years old and still touring internationally, celebrated as a living legend who refused to slow down or step away from the live performances that fueled his enduring career. On May 17, 1996, Watson was booked for a performance at the Ocean Boulevard Blues Club in Yokohama, Japan. The venue was packed with fans who had come to see the American blues pioneer deliver his signature electric sound. Watson took the stage wearing his trademark fedora and tailored suit, guitar strapped over his shoulder, ready to launch into his opening numbers. As the band started playing, Watson stepped up to the microphone to deliver his first lyrics of the evening. Before he could finish the phrase, he suddenly collapsed forward, falling heavily onto the stage. The audience, initially thinking it was part of his historically flamboyant act, quickly realized the severity of the situation as his bandmates stopped playing and rushed to help him. Emergency medical personnel were called, and Watson was quickly transported to a local hospital. He had suffered a massive, fatal myocardial infarction right as his guitar solo was meant to begin. He was pronounced dead shortly after, leaving behind a legacy that had ended abruptly in the middle of a spotlight in Japan. Final note in Paris. Michael Benjamin, known to millions of fans as Mikaben, was one of the most versatile and beloved artists in Caribbean music. A singer, songwriter, and producer, he spent over 2 decades crafting hits that blended traditional Haitian compas with modern pop. By 2022, Mikaben was recognized as a cultural ambassador for Haiti, utilizing his platform to uplift his nation's music globally. On October 15, 2022, Mikaben was performing at the Accor Arena in Paris, France, an immense venue holding over 10,000 spectators. He had been invited as a guest to perform alongside the legendary Haitian band Karimi for their reunion concert. The energy was electric, with the massive crowd singing along as Mikaben delivered a soaring, passionate vocal performance of his hit song. As his set concluded, he smiled, waved to the adoring thousands, and turned to walk toward the back of the stage. Just as he reached the wings, out of the direct spotlight but still visible to many in the crowd, he collapsed entirely. First responders rushed to him immediately, performing CPR backstage as the venue fell into a tense, terrified silence. The concert was halted, and the arena was eventually evacuated. Mikaben had suffered a sudden cardiac arrest and was pronounced dead at the venue, passing away at 41 years old mere seconds after finishing one of the most triumphant performances of his life. The last song in Whistler. Dan McLean, beloved as Country Dick Montana, was the towering frontman and drummer for the Beat Farmers. Known for his unpredictable stage antics and dark humor, he helped pioneer a gritty fusion of punk and country music throughout the 1980s and 90s. By 1995, the Beat Farmers were touring relentlessly, relying on Montana's sheer force of personality to drive their legendary live shows. On November 8, 1995, the band was scheduled to play at the Longhorn Saloon in Whistler, British Columbia. The venue was a bustling, intimate club, perfectly suited for the rowdy energy they were known to deliver. Montana, 40 years old, took the stage to play drums and sing. 3 songs into the performance, the band launched into their track, The Girl I Almost Married. Midway through the song, Montana suddenly slumped over his drum kit. Given his reputation for absurd physical comedy, the audience and even his bandmates assumed he was executing a dramatic bit. The band played on for a few moments, waiting for him to pop back up. When he remained motionless, the reality of the situation sank in. The show was stopped, and emergency services were called. Montana had suffered a fatal heart attack. He could not be resuscitated and was pronounced dead, marking the end of a performer who went out exactly as he had lived. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.